Representative Nancy Mace for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank Ms. Thompson. I was a state lawmaker for 3 years before I came to Congress. I represent the 1st Congressional District of South Carolina, and South Carolina has had its own history, very bad history with black South Carolinians, black and brown and African Americans. I recently took a vote to move statues like Supreme Court Justice Taney, removing his bust out of the Capitol Rotunda because he wrote the Dred Scott opinion, the one that said that black and brown and African Americans could not become citizens of the United States of America. I voted to move, someone like Wade Hampton, who encouraged the murder of over 150 black South Carolinians during his run for governor. And so I appreciate your comments about the 60s. I was not around then, but I've watched and read a lot of the history and seen the videos and seen the moments of violence against black America. So I applaud your work on that. My understanding is you were elected in 1972 in Texas. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Right, and I applaud you for making history, I imagine, in Texas and being a strong voice for black men and black women. Coming from South Carolina, we've got voter ID. And I'm assuming Texas is the same way. Do y'all need IDs to buy alcohol when you're purchasing at the store?
Yes, to be sure that you are capable of doing that.
Right. Do you need an ID in Texas to buy cigarettes?
You can't buy them unless you're at least 21.
But do you have to show an ID to buy cigarettes?
You do have to show an ID.
Do you need an ID when you're getting a job and trying to get on payroll in Texas?
Yes.
Do you need an ID to go to the pharmacy and get a prescription in Texas?
It depends on the prescription.
But do you need an ID for some prescriptions
Yes,
in Texas?
You do. Yes.
Do you need an ID to get Social Security services in Texas?
You do.
Do you need an ID to rent an apartment in Texas?
Yes.
Do you need an ID if you're going to buy a house and finance it via a mortgage in Texas?
Yes.
Do you need an ID in Texas if you're going to board an aircraft and fly commercial?
Yes.
Did you fly commercial or fly a private jet on the way to D.C.?
A chartered plane.
Do you have to show an ID when you fly in a private charter jet?
Yes.
I wouldn't know. I've never flown on one. So did you need an ID to get in the building here today?
Yes.
Do you need an ID in Texas to open a bank account?
Yes.
To cash your check if you're working. Do you know, Representative Thompson, what percentage of blacks in Texas, black and brown and African Americans, are registered to vote?
Oh, a huge percentage.
70%. Do you know what percentage of African Americans, black and brown Texans have voted on average or in the last election?
About 64%.
Correct. Do you know how many whites are registered to vote in Texas?
Far more than African Americans.
72%. You have 70% of blacks in Texas who are registered to vote. You have 72% of whites in Texas who are registered to vote. Do you know the percentage of whites who turned out to vote in recent elections?
I want to say over 50-some%.
65%. Yeah. Do you know what percentage of Hispanics are registered to vote in Texas?
No, I do not.
63%. Do you know what percentage of Hispanics voted in the last election?
I think it was over 40%.
53%. Hispanics are not voting in as high numbers as blacks and whites in Texas. Do you know the percentage of Democrats that support voter ID?
Would you repeat your question?
Do you know the number or percentage of Democrats who support voter ID in this country?
I do not, but I don't think it's a whole lot.
72%. Okay. Do you know the number of black and brown and African Americans in this country who support voter ID?
No.
75%. Do you know the number of Hispanics that support voter ID in this country?
No.
81%. Do you know where the state of Texas is ranked with black voter turnout in this country?
With black voters turnout?
Mm-hmm. Do you know where Texas is ranked?
Oh, about 44%.
The latest numbers that I read this morning was that Texas is ranked 10th. Do you know where Texas is ranked? So then top 10 in the country. Do you know where Texas is ranked with women voters?
Oh, way up in the 50s.
In the bottom third of this country. So I would argue that Texas has a more difficult problem with getting women out to vote than Black and brown and African Americans. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. I'd like to go to Congresswoman Robin Kelly. 5 minutes of questioning.
I thank the chairman, and I also thank the chairman for allowing me to wave on. Obviously, I was the ranking member and served with you in this last Congress, so I appreciate that very much.
And it's good to see you back. And I should tell you that my friend Jennifer Lord, who's your constituent and a conservative Republican, is watching us today. So
Excellent.
Please be on your best behavior.
I appreciate that, and great to see my colleagues from Texas. Although I wish we were under slightly different circumstances. Obviously, I think that you guys should be in Austin, Texas, performing those duties. Let me ask you a couple quick questions here, and I'm just going to scatter these around. Just give me yes or no answers if you can. Representative Bernal, is Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act remaining full in effect?
Excuse me?
Is Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act remaining full in effect right now?
Yes.
All right. And are you aware, was it just Section 5 that was overturned in the Shelby County decision 8 years ago? Right. And that the reason that the body, that it was overturned was that this body failed to update the formula and was using 50-year-old data and a 50-year-old formula. Is that yes or no? Is that why it was overturned?
That was among the reasons.
So the Voting Rights Act remains in effect. The 1965 Voting Rights Act remains in effect. That provision, Section 5, is what was overturned because it was 50-year-old data. May I ask another question on this of each witness? Do you believe that Texas should have to submit to the Department of Justice for any changes that it makes in its voting laws or formulas?
Yes.
Ms. Collier, or Representative Collier?
The historical nature of Texas
Just yes or no, do you think
would
Texas's
support
election
that.
laws should have to submit to the Department of Justice for preclearance?
Not only for that, for maps as well.
And Representative Thompson, do you believe that they should have to submit to the Department of Justice for preclearance?
Yes.
So, for the record, the representatives from Texas believe that they should have to defer to Washington, defer to the federal government on what we should do for election laws in the state of Texas. Now, each of the three of you are aware that you are in fact violating Texas law by being here right now instead of being in Texas during the legislative session, and that it would be in order to arrest you were you in the state of Texas to get you back to the state house. We agree that those are the facts. Representative Bernal?
I'm not sure those laws are constitutional.
But is that the law in the state of Texas? We can argue the constitutionality.
I don't think so.
I think the law of the state of Texas is that you're supposed to be in session and that you're supposed to be there carrying out your constitutional duty. Do you support H.R. 1, the federal law that was passed here in the House of Representatives? Representative Bernal?
Yes.
Representative Collier?
I believe I will stand with the congressional members who passed it, so I support their.
Representative Thompson, do you support H.R. 1?
I do. And Mr. Chair, I'd like to just say I'm ready to be arrested. I'm not violating the law, and I'm representing my constituents, and I stand ready. Bring the handcuffs on, and I'm ready to go.
Representative Thompson, reclaiming my time. I appreciate that's your view on the matter. I think that makes the case precisely. With respect to H.R. 1, each of the witnesses, one said that she opposed voter ID, two said some forms of voter ID. I would point out and just want to clarify that H.R. 1 would in fact say that an individual in the state is eligible to cast a vote in an election for federal office. The state may not impose any additional conditions or requirements on the eligibility of the individual to cast the vote in such election by absentee ballot by mail. In other words, federal prohibition on the use of voter ID with respect to absentee ballot by mail and interfering with the state's rights to ability to use voter ID. I've heard a number of witnesses testify about the lack of examples of the witnesses of fraud. On September 3rd, 2014, at the United States District Court in Corpus Christi, Democrat election expert Buck Wood was asked if there was a voter fraud occurring by mail. His response, and I quote, was yes, very definitely. Do you agree with him? Representative Bernal?
Do I agree that Buck Wood was aware of a case of
Was asked
fraud?
if there was voter fraud occurring by mail. His response, and I quote, was very definitely. Do you agree with him?
I believe that he said that, sure.
Representative Collier, do you agree with him, his assertion?
I cannot confirm or deny. I'm not sure.
Representative Thompson?
I'm not aware of him saying that.
Okay. In 2007, your colleague, who also happens to be here in D.C., Rafael Anchia, said, and I quote, vote by mail that we know is the greatest source of voter fraud in this state. Do you agree with Representative Anchia, yes or no? Greatest source of fraud, yes or no? Do you agree with Anchia or no?
I have no reason to, I have nothing to base the fact that the greatest source of voter fraud.
Okay, so you're disagreeing with Representative Bonchia. Representative Collier.
I don't know what context, so I cannot confirm or deny what you're just
Well, the exact quote, vote by mail, that we know is the greatest source of voter fraud in this state. Do
I'm
you
not
agree with
sure
that?
what the context was.
Well, that's the context, that statement, straight up, it's
Well, give
plain
us
English.
the rest of it. Tell us what else he was talking about.
The sentence, vote by mail, that we know is the greatest source of voter fraud in this state. Do you agree with that?
Sir, I would decline to respond.
Representative Thompson?
I think he would be at a better advantage here if he was here to answer that question for you.
Well, 18 years ago, Representative Garnett Coleman, a Democrat, tried to ban pre-printed ballot by mail applications. Do you agree with Representative Coleman that we should ban pre-printed ballot by mail applications? Representative Bernal?
I do not.
Representative Collier?
I'm not aware of that statement.
Do you agree, though, with that position?
I cannot say what he thought or what he did.
Representative Thompson?
I'm not aware of his making that statement.
Congressman, can I clarify the question?
Very quickly, because I'm running out of
Are
time.
you talking about an application or are you talking about a ballot?
Pre-printed mail-in ballot.
No. Application, yes. Ballot, no.
Okay. All right. And then with respect to the assertions earlier, I think was placed into the record, the chairman put in a number of videos and statements from Texas constituents. I would ask to insert into the record a document that I outline a number of examples of voter fraud, including statements from black witnesses who testified in the Texas legislature about voter fraud.
Wait, this is a statement from you?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
yes.
Without objection.
And in that, you have Jerry Wayne Monroe, Aubrey Taylor, Demetria Smith. Demetria's quote was, "Democrats are going after my ancestors. You are making a mockery of my suffrage and you use it to your advantage for your own agenda so you can keep your own seat. It's not about the people." Aubrey Taylor, "Hear me. Elections are being stolen in Harris County. And if something is not done right now, I guarantee you get ready to lose the state." Jerry Wayne Monroe, "My community is suffering because there are kingmakers and they cheated in the last election." He testified that he witnessed ballot harvesters take $22,000 in pay. He affirms that ballot harvesters were soliciting nursing homes. He testified that a poll location had spare IDs available for voters if they did not have one. The fact of the matter is, there is fraud in elections. The fact of the matter is, the legislature is putting forward a good faith effort to try to reform our election laws in the state of Texas. And the fact of the matter is, Texas Democrats fled Texas to Washington, where they're asking Washington to step over the interest in the voters of Texas.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Roy. It's great to have you back. I now will recognize Ms.
My time has elapsed, so I recognize you for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Thornburg, thank you for your involvement here today. I commend you for your willingness to testify and get involved with public policy. In the past, when you're talking about climate change, you have said, quote, "I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear I feel every day." Is there what particular study or scientific report did you read that made you come to this conclusion?
Thank you for your question. First of all, let me just clear that those are metaphors. In speeches, you often use metaphors. Of course, I don't mean literally that I want people to panic. So there was no scientific study that made me come to that conclusion.
Oh, okay, so you didn't say that.
I did, but it's a metaphor that you often use in speeches.
Metaphor for what? I mean, how do you, what I'm asking on panic, I want you to panic. What does that, tell me what you meant by that.
By that, I mean that I want people to step out of their comfort zones. And to not just see the climate crisis as a far distant threat, but rather as something that is impacting people already today. And people to step out of their comfort zones to start taking real action. Okay.
What in your opinion is on the ppm parts per million, what is acceptable, permissible on CO2 emissions in your opinion? What actual amount do you think is permissible?
Well, I mean, of course, there is no magic amount that says that this is an okay amount. The science doesn't really work that way. But of course, we can say that it is the higher the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere is, the bigger the risks are going to be. So, I mean, you can't say that there's one amount that is acceptable and not. Of course, there's not one magic tipping point where everything is beyond saving and so on. But rather, we should try to keep it as low as possible.
Okay, so you wouldn't name a particular number. What about China, India, the other countries where there's if this bill passes, there's no retribution against these countries that's going to offset anything we do here in America? What is your take on that?
Well, if we just thought like that, it would be very convenient, wouldn't it? But rather, we need to see the holistic perspective. How can we, if we take, for example, India as an example, how can we expect India to take action when the developed countries who have actually promised to lead the way won't do that? If we take into account the global aspect of equity, I mean, there are many people around the world who need to be able to raise their standard of living. And if we who live in high income countries aren't able to take a few steps back in order to let other people raise their living standard, then, I mean, that just doesn't make any sense. And of course, those countries definitely need to take their responsibility as well. And that's why we need global cooperation. And if countries won't take action, then there's no global cooperation. If the US, for example, which is the biggest emitter in history, won't take action, then how can we expect other countries to do that? So taking action ourselves is also a guarantee that other countries, I mean, it will be a snowball effect, most likely. If one country does something, then other countries will follow. If no country does something, then no one will follow.
Okay, so China is an example, which is a communist. They practice genocide on their people. They will watch America and then will just voluntarily reduce their emissions. Is that your thoughts?
No, I mean, we should do, of course, everything we can to make sure that China takes the responsibility. But I mean, there is not really much. I mean, all I can do is to try to advocate for global change. All you can do is to take action and try to create a global pressure on China so that they will have to take action. As you say, we can't just go there and ask them to do it. That would be very nice, but yeah, we need to think realistically as well.
Yeah, there's nothing in the bill that puts any type of pressure other than, I guess, showing the example. Thank you for your testimony. Ms. Macarola, can you address the direct employment in the United States that the Green New Deal would affect? We're all seeing the gas prices jump 70 cents or more. We're now dependent on foreign countries that particularly don't have our best interests. Can you discuss how this Green New Deal would affect energy costs, gas costs, and the many other minerals that they are prohibiting to be mined in other states?
Sure. Thank you for your question, Congressman Norman. I think it's first important to look at the job creation within the oil and gas industry. We support 10 million jobs in the U.S. economy, nearly 7% of the U.S. economy. On this committee alone, 325,000 jobs supported by the industry, 75,000 directly. And let's talk about what the tax increases that are being proposed would do. In 2017, as a result of reducing the corporate tax rate, we created over a period of 19 straight reports, the lowest poverty rate in 60 years since the government kept that statistic. We created jobs for 19 straight months with wage growth over that period of time prior to the pandemic. The reason we did that was 70% of the savings from the tax cuts went directly to wages. That's right into the American people's pockets. On energy, what has the result been on energy of the American energy revolution? Over the past decade, as increases in costs have gone up by double digits in healthcare, education, and food costs, energy costs have gone down by 15%. The tax proposals considered here would drive those costs up. That would mean real costs for consumers. That would mean jobs. It's essential that we not go in that direction. Thank you for your question, Congressman.
Okay, you would agree corporations don't pay taxes. People pay taxes, don't they?
People do pay taxes.
And the fact that the depreciation schedules differ from industry to industry, the oil and gas industry is not like my industry, the real estate business. It's a different type of business. One size doesn't fit all. Would you agree?
One size does not fit all for all industries. That's right, Congressman.
Member Newman, I want to give you some more time. Your time has been expired, but I want to be polite. So maybe just one or two more.
Well, that's fine, Chairman. I didn't. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. You can answer the question, the witness.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the question, Ranking Member. I think what you try to do in a tax code is to provide revenues to meet government services, but you need to ensure a fair return for the taxpayer, but also U.S. competitiveness. We are in an increasingly globally interconnected world where competitiveness is essential. Some of the provisions that the chairman discussed would directly impact that competitiveness, particularly the double taxation on income earned or on taxes paid overseas. So it's absolutely essential that you look through the lens of U.S. competitiveness as you establish provisions within the tax code. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Ranking Member. I now want to recognize.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan, is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Crabtree, when did, excuse me, when did you lose your job?
Thank you, Congressman. About 3 hours after the presidential inauguration this year.
January 20th, 2021, you lost your job. That's right?
Yes, sir.
What has happened? Do you know what's happened to the price of gasoline since that day?
I think everybody knows the answer to that question, Congressman. It's going nowhere but up, just like we tried to warn.
It's increased dramatically, hasn't it? Over $1 a gallon.
Yes, sir.
You know what's happened to the company that was overseeing the Russian Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline? Do you know what happened to them?
I believe they were allowed to finish construction. I know that for a fact.
Yeah, the sanctions against them were waived. They were allowed to complete construction of that pipeline. At the same time, yours was closed down and you lost your job. You know what's happened to American energy independence since the day you were fired?
Well, the words OPEC seem to be coming back in the media more these days, and I didn't hear that for a lot of years, so we've lost it.
Yeah,
that's what's happened.
Mr. Summers, are CO2 emissions in the United States lower today than they were 20 years ago?
They are, Congressman.
Significantly lower, is that right?
They are significantly lower. In fact, CO2 emissions from the power sector in particular are at the lowest level since 1978.
And that's because, you know, things like cap and trade passed and regulations from the government caused you to lower them. Isn't that true?
Congressman, actually, that is because of the innovation that has occurred in the American oil and gas industry.
Exactly. Cap and trade didn't pass. It's not because of regulations from government. You guys did that on your own because it's just the right thing to do and it's good business, right?
That's right, Congressman. As I mentioned before, every energy source has to meet that energy trilemma: affordable, reliable, and cleaner. And that's what this industry has delivered.
10 months ago, was the United States of America energy independent, Mr. Summers?
What I would say, Congressman, is that the United States was North American energy independent and well on our way to American energy independence.
We were exporting a lot too, weren't we?
We were. Unfortunately, over the course of the last few months, we're actually importing oil into the United States for the first time in a while.
Yeah, that was my next question. So in 10 months' time, we went from being energy independent to now we're importing oil, and we had the spectacle of the President of the United States begging OPEC to increase production. Is that accurate?
Well, Congressman, the U.S. was a net petroleum exporter for the first time since 1958 in the year 2020. And, you know, we were very proud of being the world's largest producer of oil and natural gas as a consequence of the innovation and the technological revolution that has occurred in the American oil and gas industry.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say it better than our colleague from Florida who spoke a few minutes ago, but in 10 months' time, we have literally went from energy independence to the President of the United States begging OPEC to increase production to now we're having to import some of our energy needs. We've went from $2 gas to $3, $4, $5. I was in California a week and a half ago, $5 gas, I saw it there, which costs families hundreds of dollars a month in transportation cost. I mean, I think Mr. Crabtree, I think in his testimony said he still hasn't found a job. So not only did he lose his job because of the crazy energy policies of this government, he's now paying all kinds of more. His family's paying more for their transportation costs and other energy needs. And what do Democrats do today? They come in and badger companies, tell them to further reduce, in some cases, production of oil and gas, which is only going to exacerbate the problem. I mean, it's literally maybe the craziest thing I've ever heard, but that's where they're at. I don't think the American people are with them, though, and that's the good news. So I want to thank those companies who are actually increasing production. Mr. Summers, I want to thank you for your testimony today. Mr. Crabtree, you deserve better, and hopefully with some changes that I think are coming, because I don't think the American people are going to tolerate this. Hopefully you'll be employed real soon. And we'll get these energy prices back where the families of this great country deserve to have them. With that, I yield back.
Chairman Sellers and Supervisor Gates, thank you for being here today. You are both lifelong Republicans. Mr. Gates, I understand that you even founded a teenage Republican party while you were in high school. And I don't think anyone would question either of you for your long-held allegiance to the Republican Party. Yet you have both been outspoken messengers that the 2020 election was safe, secure, and fair, even when that message has brought you into conflict with members of your own party. Nearly every Republican in the Arizona State Senate voted to hold both of you in contempt for standing up against the cyber ninja audit. One Republican state senator called for the entire Maricopa board to be arrested and put in solitary confinement. My question for you, Supervisor Gates, why have you chosen to speak out so forcefully on this issue, even against some members of your own party?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. It hasn't been easy to do this. I have been a lifelong Republican, and I'm proud to be a Republican. But I'm also a member of the Board of Supervisors, and as was mentioned earlier, the Board of Supervisors took more authority in running elections in 2020 because we wanted to run an excellent election, and we believe that that's what has happened here. But the problem is that as people have been distorting what happened in this election, I have no problem with people raising questions. What I have a problem with is people going to the lengths, as you mentioned. We had gone to court to get direction from a Superior Court judge on whether we had the legal authority to turn the ballots over. We had asked for an expedited hearing, and despite that, the Arizona State Senate was one vote away from holding us in contempt and most likely detaining us. That was wrong. It was also wrong, once they had the ballots, in my opinion, to conduct an audit with auditors who had no elections experience, and then also auditors who clearly had a preconceived notion. I don't have a problem with audits. I had concerns with this particular audit, and that's why I'm speaking out.
And Chairman Sellers, what about you? Why are you speaking out today?
When I first got on the Board of Supervisors, we were in the process of taking the parts of the election process back that we could, because we'd had some issues with elections in the past couple of elections, people waiting in lines for 4 or 5 hours and those kind of things. And the interesting thing to me was that every step of the way, we ensured that we were staying within the U.S. and the Arizona Constitution on everything we did. When we were faced with a pandemic and had to change the way we were going to run the election from a precinct-based model to a vote center model. We again went back to the political parties, to the Secretary of State, to the governor, to the Attorney General, and got their agreement on everything we were doing, that it was legal and going to provide us with a safe, secure election going forward.
Thank you. Reclaiming my time, I have very limited time. Mr. Sellers and Mr. Gates, you faced pressure to support President Trump's big lie even before the audit started. On Christmas Eve last year, former President Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, called both Mr. Sellers and Mr. Gates as part of Trump's pressure campaign to try to overturn the election results in Arizona. Neither of you picked up, so he left a voicemail message. I'd like to play one of those voicemails now that Mr. Giuliani left for Chairman Sellers. May we hear the audio now, please?
Hi, Rudy Giuliani, President Trump's attorney calling. I'm hoping we could have a chance to have a conversation. I'd like to see if there's a way that we could resolve this so it comes out well for everyone. We're all Republicans. I think we all have the same goal. Let's see if we can get this done outside of the courts. Gosh. Okay, call me anytime. No problem. Bye.
Mr. Giuliani said, and I quote, we're all Republicans. I think we all have the same goal. I'd like to ask you, Supervisor Gates, what do you think that goal was? And you got a similar call where he said, he asked you to, quote, get this thing fixed up, end quote, and saying, quote, I think there may be a nice way to resolve this. What do you think Mr. Giuliani wanted you to do?
Madam Chair, just a point of order real quick. I hope I'm going to be extended the same courtesy to go beyond the 5-minute limit.
Absolutely.
Madam Chair, that voicemail was left at a time we were in litigation with the state Senate over turning over the ballots in the election machines. I think he was trying to get us to settle that lawsuit so that they could very quickly get the ballots in advance of the January 6th certification of the Electoral College.
And why was this so important? What was Mr. Giuliani's ultimate goal? What do you think his ultimate goal was?
Well, I can't speculate on that, but I think that he wanted to look at the evidence and see if there was evidence to support not certifying the election.
And I want to thank you both. My time is up, and the many other state and local officials who stood up to Trump's pressure campaign and turned back his efforts to overturn a free and fair election. The late Senator from Arizona, John McCain, once said, and I quote, "We are Americans first, Americans last, Americans always." I agree. We are Americans before we are members of any political party. Chairman Sellers and Supervisor Gates, I hope other Republicans, including my colleagues in Congress, follow the example that you set today. I want to thank you for your testimony. Thank you so much. I now recognize